They had a perfect lawn. I mean, magazine perfect. They would stare at mine whenever a weed popped up. One day, I planted a small herb garden. They said, "That's not lawn approved." So I added a sign, "This lawn grows flavor." Now passersby ask if they can smell the basil. My neighbors, the Petersons, epitomized this ethos. Their lawn was the crown jewel of the block, lush, green, and trimmed with military precision. It looked like it belonged on the cover of a landscaping magazine. In contrast, my lawn was, well, lived in. I mowed it regularly and pulled weeds when I had time, but I didn't obsess over it. I believed a lawn should be enjoyed, not worshipped. The Petersons didn't share this sentiment. Every time a dandelion dared to sprout in my yard, I'd catch them staring, their eyes narrowing in judgment. It was as if my lawn's imperfections were a personal affront to their sensibilities. One spring, I decided to plant a small herb garden near my front porch. I built a modest raised bed and filled it with basil, rosemary, thyme, and mint. It wasn't grand, but it brought me joy. I loved the idea of stepping outside to snip fresh herbs for cooking. A few days after planting, Mrs. Peterson approached me as I was watering the herbs. "Is that a garden?" she asked, her tone laced with disdain. "Yes," I replied, smiling. "Just some herbs for cooking." She frowned. "Front lawns are meant for grass, not vegetable patches. It's not lawn approved." I was taken aback. I didn't realize there were rules about what I could plant in my own yard. She sniffed. "Well, it's unsightly. It brings down the neighborhood's aesthetic." I nodded, not wanting to escalate the situation. But inside, I was fuming. Who were they to dictate what I could or couldn't plant on my property? That evening, I crafted a wooden sign and painted it with bold letters, "This lawn grows flavor." I staked it proudly in front of my herb garden. The next morning, as I sipped my coffee on the porch, I watched as joggers and dog walkers paused to read the sign. Some chuckled, others nodded appreciatively. One woman even asked if she could smell the basil. Over the next few weeks, more neighbors stopped by to admire the garden. They'd ask questions about the herbs, share recipes, and even bring their kids to learn about gardening. It became a small community hub. The Petersons, however, were not amused. They began to escalate their passive-aggressive tactics. I'd find anonymous notes in my mailbox criticizing the messy appearance of my yard. Once, I caught Mr. Peterson spraying weed killer suspiciously close to my herb bed. I confronted him, and he claimed he was just treating his own lawn. I decided to install a security camera, just in case. One morning, I discovered my basil plants wilted and brown. Someone had poured a chemical substance over them. I checked the security footage and, unsurprisingly, it was Mr. Peterson. Armed with the evidence, I reported the incident to the local authorities. The police issued him a warning, and I pressed charges for property damage. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood, and the Petersons' pristine reputation began to tarnish. In solidarity, several neighbors started their own front yard gardens. Soon, our street blossomed with tomatoes, peppers, sunflowers, and herbs. The once uniform lawns transformed into vibrant, diverse landscapes. The Petersons retreated, their perfect lawn now a symbol of outdated rigidity amidst a community embracing change and individuality. And my sign? It's still there, standing tall, "This lawn grows flavor." It didn't end with the sign or the basil. After the police gave Mr. Peterson a warning and I filed the property damage claim, things got quiet. Too quiet. I had a gut feeling the storm wasn't over. You know that sense when you walk into a room and feel something off? That was the air around our little street now. Some neighbors still smiled and waved, but others had turned cautious. I started noticing subtle things. My trash cans would be knocked over in the morning, though I always secured them. My mail started arriving later and later, sometimes soaked, like it had been left out on purpose. My porch lights were unscrewed twice in 1 week. I didn't want to become paranoid, but it was hard not to. Then came the HOA meeting. I'd lived here for 10 years, and in all that time, nobody had cared about bylaws. But suddenly, the Petersons proposed a Lawn Standards and Beautification Clause update. Guess what it said? No non-grass plantings allowed in front yards. No edible plants. No custom signs. They didn't mention me by name, but everyone knew who the target was. They brought a printed packet. Glossy pictures of offensive landscaping. Front and center. My herb garden and my sign. The image was printed in black and white, but you could tell the basil had been thriving when that picture was taken. It made me sick. I stood up to speak. My voice shook, but I was done being quiet. My garden doesn't hurt anyone. In fact, it's helped this street feel more alive. I didn't start a war. I planted basil. A few people clapped. Some looked away. But the Petersons sat there like stone, lips pursed, eyes cold. The vote was set for the following week. That weekend, someone tore the sign out of my yard. Not just knocked it over, ripped it out. Snapped it in half. I found it tossed behind my garage, like a body dumped in the night. I fixed it. Reinforced the base with metal. Painted the letters even bigger this time. And I added a new line beneath, "Don't like it? That's flavor, not your problem." The day before the vote, I got a letter. Certified mail. From a local lawyer. It claimed that if I continued to operate a front yard vegetable enterprise, the HOA would pursue legal action. They called it an unauthorized agricultural installation. I almost laughed, but my hands were shaking too hard. I called the lawyer listed on the letter. Told them to expect my own attorney's contact. I wasn't going to roll over. Then I did something the Petersons didn't expect. I went public. I posted on the local community Facebook page. Told the whole story. The garden, the sign, the chemical sabotage, the broken basil, the petty rules, the ripped sign, the fake legal threat. I posted pictures, side-by-side shots of my garden and the pristine lawn next door. One full of life. One that looked like it came out of a spray bottle. It went viral. Within a day, people were commenting from all over the state. Journalists reached out. A local news crew showed up on my porch that afternoon. I told them everything, holding a sprig of rosemary like a tiny microphone. And the next morning? Oh, you better believe the Petersons were fuming. They tried to deny it all, but the footage I gave the police didn't lie. I even had a video of Mr. Peterson yanking the first sign from my yard. Turns out, when he leaned over, the motion sensor camera caught the whole thing. Clear as day. The vote happened anyway. And it was close. Real close. The motion failed, by 1 vote. 1. I knew who flipped. It was Mrs. Valdez, 4 houses down. She told me later that her granddaughter started planting herbs after seeing mine. That was all it took. But the Petersons weren't done. Not even close. A week later, I came home to a notice pinned to my front door. Someone reported me for illegal drainage from my garden bed. Claimed it was flooding the sidewalk. I checked, nothing. Dry as sand. But I still had to deal with the city inspector. Then my compost bin mysteriously disappeared. Someone actually took it. Who does that? The police said without proof, nothing could be done. So I got smarter. I upgraded the cameras. Put up motion lights. Even installed a trail cam camouflaged in the hedge. That's when I caught her, Mrs. Peterson. Out at 2:15 a.m., digging in my flower bed. She was trying to plant weeds in my garden. Literal weeds. I guess to prove it was messy. I handed the footage over. Another police report. Another warning. And this time, a restraining order request. The local news came back for an update. They called it Herbgate. I hated the name, but it got attention. Now my yard had become a kind of silent rebellion. Neighbors added their own signs: grow kindness, garden not guilt, flavor is freedom. The street looked more like a community garden every day. But the Petersons? They started building a fence. A big one. 6 feet high, all around their yard. It was like watching someone build a castle out of fear. The HOA called an emergency meeting to discuss the fence. Turns out, that wasn't approved either. I didn't even speak. I just watched as the neighborhood finally turned on them. And still, I know it's not over. Because perfect grass hides a lot of dirt underneath. And I'm not going anywhere. I should have known things wouldn't settle down just because a vote didn't pass. Some people don't lose quietly. Especially when they've spent years convincing themselves they're always right. The fence was just the start. The Petersons made it clear they weren't going to stop until they made me miserable, or forced me out. But here's the thing, I grew up in a family that didn't quit. My mom raised 3 kids by herself working double shifts at a diner. I know what stubborn looks like. I am stubborn. A month after the vote, things took a darker turn. It started when I got a letter from the city. A fine. For unauthorized signage on residential property. The letter included a grainy photo of my sign. No return address. But it was clear someone had reported me, again. I appealed it, of course. Took it all the way to the city council. Brought the sign in, explained the whole story. The council clerk laughed when she saw it. She even asked me for a sprig of mint. The fine was dismissed. But then came the stranger things. One night, just after midnight, I was woken by a strange humming sound outside my window. I looked out, and someone had set up a leaf blower on a timer in front of my house, blasting the herbs with hot air. The wind stripped the basil leaves. My lavender snapped at the stems. I stood on the porch in pajamas, staring at the destruction. I reported it, of course. But the officer just shrugged. Could be kids, he said. Could be a prank. Maybe. But it was too precise. Too mean. Then a small drone started showing up. Hovering near my porch, buzzing around the garden bed like a mosquito with a GoPro. It didn't take long to figure out where it was coming from. I watched it fly back. Straight over the Petersons' fence. I called the FAA. Sent footage. Turns out, flying a drone within 30 feet of someone's windows without permission. Very illegal. They opened an investigation. That same week, I was sitting on the porch when a man in a suit showed up at my door. He handed me a folder and said, "You've been served." The Petersons were suing me for defamation. I laughed. Actually laughed out loud. The claims said I damaged their reputation by falsely accusing them of sabotage. They wanted damages. Money. A public apology. Removal of all social media posts. I hired a lawyer. A real bulldog. She went through every file, every video, every message. Turned out, their case was built on nothing but smoke and ego. But something else came out during discovery, something I didn't expect. Emails. Dozens of them. Between the Petersons and another neighbor. A guy named Raymond across the street. I hadn't paid him much attention, but he always seemed a little too friendly with them. The emails were full of plans. Talking about tightening the noose and showing them how things are done in real neighborhoods. One email even included a map of my backyard. With notes. They were trying to get my water lines investigated. Planning to call animal control on my cat. Looking into hiring a private investigator to dig up something real. My lawyer said it was one of the nastiest patterns of harassment she'd ever seen. We filed a counterclaim. And here's the twist, the day after the emails were submitted to court, Raymond's house was raided. Not by police, but by city officials. Someone, and I'm guessing it was a neighbor finally tired of the nonsense, had reported his illegal home renovation project. Turns out he was converting his garage into an Airbnb without permits. Code violations everywhere. He lost his rental license. Fined thousands. That's when the tide really turned. Neighbors who had been quiet before started showing up on my porch with casseroles, gardening books, seed packets. They'd been watching, staying neutral, but now they were stepping in. Mrs. Wilson brought over a starter fig tree. Said she hadn't planted anything in 30 years, but my story lit a little fire in her again. And then, someone anonymous dropped a massive bag of compost on my porch. With a note, for the flavor. But the biggest twist? One day, a new family moved in next door to the Petersons. Young couple, pregnant, full of ideas and energy. First week, they tore out the back lawn and built a massive raised bed garden. Tomatoes, kale, cucumbers, even strawberries. I could see the Petersons' curtains twitch every time they stepped outside with a watering can. A week later, a handwritten sign popped up in their yard, "Grow together, or grow alone." It lit a fuse. The Petersons tried to propose a new bylaw, again. But this time, they were outnumbered. Even the HOA president had turned. She told them flat out at the next meeting, "We're not in the business of controlling joy." The Petersons stopped attending meetings after that. And yet, somehow, I know it's not over. People like them don't just give up. They lay low. They wait. But so do I. The garden's bigger now. I added sage, lemon balm, chamomile. People still stop and ask for recipes. Some just want to touch the leaves. Others come to vent, talk about the world, remember what it means to be neighborly. And me? I sit on the porch, tea in hand, surrounded by flavor. And I watch that perfect lawn next door, waiting for the next weed to pop up. It was early autumn when it all came to a head. The heat had faded, the air was sharp with change, and my garden, my once small herb bed, had become a full-blown neighborhood attraction. There were pumpkins now. Rows of colorful chard. Bright purple cabbage twisting into itself like coiled ribbon. A wooden bench sat beneath the maple tree, where people would come and just sit. Talk. Breathe. But across the fence, the Petersons' lawn had started to change too. Not for the better. It was subtle at first. A patch of browning grass near the walkway. Then a strip along the hedge where the soil turned dry and brittle. The perfect green had lost its glow. I didn't celebrate it. Not yet. I knew they wouldn't let that go unanswered. Then one night, I woke to sirens. Flashing red and blue lights danced across my ceiling. I threw on a jacket and stepped outside. The Petersons' lawn was lit up with emergency crews, hoses stretched across the road. Smoke curled up from a small shed in their backyard, the one Mr. Peterson had built illegally 2 summers ago. It was a fire. Not a big one. But enough. No one was hurt. But the fire inspector said it had started because of poor wiring. A grow lamp, overloaded socket. Something electrical in the shed. They weren't growing grass in there. They were growing pot. Illegally. Turns out, all those years of criticizing everyone else's choices. The Petersons had their own little side hustle going, hidden behind that perfect lawn. A secret garden of their own. And the fire exposed it all. The police found plants, processed product, cash. More than a personal stash. It made the local news. Again. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The headlines did it for me, model HOA couple busted in backyard pot operation. From grass to grime, the Peterson fall from suburban grace. But here's where it gets real. A week later, I found another letter on my porch. Only this time, it wasn't a fine or a threat. It was from Mrs. Peterson. It wasn't handwritten, just printed. Cold. But the words stuck with me. She said I'd won. That the circus I brought to the neighborhood had destroyed everything. She blamed me for everything, the fire, the shame, the neighbors turning their backs. She said she hoped I was proud of what I'd done. And for a moment, I wasn't. Because yeah, they were monsters to me. Petty, controlling, cruel. But I wasn't innocent either. I had made them the villains of a story I'd helped write. I fed the fire with every post, every comment, every snarky addition to my sign. I didn't just fight back, I fought to win. And maybe I crossed a line too. I kept the letter. Framed it, actually. Not out of pride. But as a reminder. But revenge has a way of circling back. A few weeks later, a lawyer friend sent me an article. Apparently, the Petersons weren't the only ones under investigation. The HOA had been covering for years, fixing violations, faking inspections, looking the other way if you were in the circle. Now the whole board was being looked into. And guess who got called as a witness? Me. I showed up at the hearing with a binder thicker than a phone book. Emails. Photos. Video clips. I sat in a room full of people who once rolled their eyes at my garden, and I told them everything. About the drone. The sabotage. The lawsuit. The fake citations. The state revoked the HOA's authority. A new board was formed. Elections were held. And I was elected president. First order of business. A new bylaw: residents are encouraged to cultivate sustainable, edible, or pollinator-friendly gardens in any visible area of their property. Second order. Every home on the block got a sign. Paid for by the community fund. Each one said, "This lawn grows flavor." And every single one had my garden's image printed at the bottom. Basil in the breeze. Mint catching the light. The Petersons moved out the following spring. For sale sign came up quietly. No goodbye. No explanations. Their perfect lawn. It died the moment they left. And me? I stayed. Not just because I'd won. But because that street, those people, they weren't just neighbors anymore. We'd built something real out of all that mess. Out of weeds and warnings and war. It wasn't just revenge. It was a garden. A revolution in soil. And every time someone walks by and asks to sniff the rosemary, I smile. Because this lawn, it still grows flavor.